Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Waffle Flower Crafts. In this video, I'm going to share with you a bunch of ideas for adding some stitched details to your card designs using the new Stitchable dies. I'm going to create a scene. I have a panel here of 110-pound white cardstock. It's a little bit smaller than an A2 panel. It is 5.5 by 4, and I've already die cut it with the Stitchable ZigZag die and a die from the Stitchable Squares die set. I'm going to turn this into a ocean scene. The zigzag section is going to be my ocean, and that straight bar at the bottom is going to be my beach. But I do want it to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to die cut it again with this die from the Stitchable Squares die set. I'm going to nestle that top of the die into the last row that I die cut, and that's going to make sure that that pattern is continuous. So this is a great tip for kind of continuing your stitched openings and making sure that they are lined up just by nestling it into the previously die cut area. So now that that is die cut, I'm going to move on to ink blending. I'm going to use some painter's tape to kind of mask off my areas. I'm going to start by taping off the top of the water here. I'm just going to go just above where the last row of openings are. And I'm also going to go ahead and tape off my beach. I don't need to do that really, but I went ahead and placed it down just as it kind of holds that paper down a little bit better. Now the first part I'm going to ink blend is the sky. I'm going to start with tumbled glass and just quickly ink blend a very simplistic blue sky. And once I finish that sky, I'll then remove my painter's tape, tape off my sky, and then I'll move on to ink blending my ocean. I have a couple colors picked out for my ocean. I'm going to start with Mermaid Lagoon. That's my lighter color, kind of ink blend it towards from the beach on up towards the sky, kind of creating a little gradation. And then I'll move on to my darker shade, which is Blueprint Sketch, and ink blend right on that horizon line and ink blend down a little bit towards the beach just to create a little gradation. Now that I've finished ink blending my ocean, I'm going to tape off the ocean to protect it, and then I'm going to move on to my sand. But before I do that, I'm going to take my damp chamois and just kind of clean off my painter's tape a little bit. If I got any of that blue ink on my painter's tape, I might pick it up on my blending tool and then transfer it down to my sand, and I don't really want that sand to be blue. So that's important to kind of clean your painter's tape sometimes, especially if you're switching from a dark color to a lighter color. I quickly ink blended that sand with Antique Linen and Tea-Dye Distress inks. Now that my ink blending is done, I'm going to move on to my sentiment. I've already stamped and colored with my Tombow Dual Brush pens several images from the Fun in the Sun combo. I also die cut them out with the matching dies, and I've positioned them here, kind of figure out where I want my sentiment to go, and also I'm going to sketch down some X's on the actual paper where I want to cross stitch some details in the sand. So I'm just making with my pencil some little X's and just to kind of mark where I want to stitch later. Now that I've got that kind of figured out, I'm going to remove all my images, pick up my sentiment, and I'm going to stamp it in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then just stamp my panel. Now that my panel is stamped, I'm going to make sure that is nice and dry, heat set that a little bit, and then I'm going to move on to stitching. I'm actually going to start with the water. I have this kind of dark blue thread picked out that kind of matches or is similar in tone anyways to the Blueprint Sketch that I ink blended. And I'm going to cross stitch kind of a zigzag row across the water here just for a water detail. I'm kind of following along with the kind of zigzag pattern that the die cuts, but I do get it off a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. I'm not stitching this whole wave. I'm not stitching this whole water, just basically a row across, a zigzag row across, just to kind of get some of that dark blue and just add a little bit of detail to that water section. Now that I've completed that whole row, I'm going to just kind of knot it in the back, or at least thread it back through my stitching in the back to kind of end it, and then I'm going to grab a lighter blue that kind of matches that Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm going to cross stitch another row kind of down more. Actually, this zigzag kind of pattern has a break in it, and I'm just stitching right at that break, or just right below that break. And again, I'm going to just do a zigzag row across, and I'm just finishing up this light blue, so I'm going to kind of feed my needle through my previous stitching to kind of end it, and that will complete my kind of stitching details for my water. So I think it just kind of adds some nice texture and some more interest to that. Now I'm going to stitch my sand. Now this is all those little X's that I made in the sand. This is just, I'm just going to do a half stitch across because I'm doing basically just a row of cross stitches. So I just did a half stitch across and then I went back through to complete the X. The previous water I did full stitches instead, just so I could kind of, because I wasn't doing a straight row, I was doing that kind of zigzag row, so I thought that full stitches were a little easier. Now I'm going to just repeat this for all those little X's that I made until I have all my little sand details done, and then I'll just finish up here by feeding my needle back through my stitches, trim my excess thread, and all my stitching is done. Now it's time to kind of bring it together with my images. I'm going to adhere my images with some foam adhesive. I have these little foam squares. They work really well for this, and I am strategically placing the squares so that when I stick my image down, none of the foam lands on the stitching. If it were to kind of have one of those foam squares on the stitching, I'm going to have kind of height variances in my my die cut, so I'm just trying to kind of place those foam squares around my stitching instead of on top of it. And I'm just going to continue to work my way around this panel till I get all my die cuts in place. And here is the finished panel. It adds a lot of nice dimension. And I'm now going to kind of bring this card together. I have a piece of pattern paper. It has these really faint stripes of orange. This is from the Unicorn half lines pad, and I've just adhered it down onto an A2 top folding white card base turned on its side, and then I also added some foam to the back side of my panel to compensate for the additional height from the stitching or the thread, and then I just stuck it down to my card front, and that actually completes my card. I'll hold up here to the camera so you can get a good look at the fun little details of that cross stitch. I think that adds just some fun interest and texture to this card. I have a lot of other examples to share with you. For this card, I used the Stitchable Pinking Rectangles die, combined it with some images from the Prost Germany combo set. And this one I wanted to share with you. Not only did I do clouds and some similar stitching for the grass, but I did my sentiment with cross stitch. So that's another option for stitched details. Here is a very quick and easy card. I used the Grow Happiness combo, and I used another die from the Stitchable Squares die set to create these 3 squares, and I did some really easy stitching, just some straight stitching to create the grass, and that card came together really quick. Here's my last card I have to share with you. All of these Stitchable Squares, hearts, and circle dies come with a little tag, and I just quickly cross-stitched a little heart and hung that tag from a Oversized hug die cut. I hope you guys enjoyed all these cards and lots of ideas for how to add some stitched accents to your cards. This is a great way to do a little bit of cross-stitching, not having to invest in a huge panel, but still get some of that fun texture and interest that it gives. I hope you guys enjoyed today's cards and video. If you'd like any more information on the products I use, please head over to Waffle Flower, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.